You wake up in the middle of the night, and the first thought that pierces your consciousness isn't about work, health, or daily concerns. It's about your child, the one who once knelt beside you in prayer, who asked innocent questions about angels and saints, who made their first communion with such pure joy that tears streamed down your face. Now that same child speaks with indifference about faith, skips Mass with calculated rebellion, or worse, openly mocks what you hold most sacred. The silence in your heart is deafening, isn't it? This isn't just teenage rebellion or a passing phase that time will heal. You sense something deeper has shifted in their soul, something that makes your parental heart feel like it's slowly breaking apart. Perhaps they've announced they no longer believe, or maybe they've simply grown cold, going through religious motions with empty eyes and a distant heart. You find yourself lying awake, wondering where you went wrong, questioning every decision you made, every word you spoke, every example you gave. The weight of their spiritual distance feels heavier than any physical burden you've ever carried. Saint Teresa of Avila understood this particular kind of suffering, though she experienced it differently. In her letters to mothers and spiritual daughters, she wrote about the profound pain of watching souls drift away from God. She knew that when someone we love turns their back on the divine, it creates a wound that goes beyond human understanding. The soul that has tasted God, she wrote in a letter to one of her correspondents, suffers more seeing another soul lost than watching their own body consumed by fire. You feel this now, don't you? This burning ache that no earthly comfort can touch. But Saint Teresa also discovered something that might transform your current anguish into purposeful action. She learned that the deepest spiritual crises often precede the most profound conversions, that souls sometimes need to wander in darkness before they can truly appreciate the light. She witnessed this pattern repeatedly in the lives of those she guided spiritually. What feels like defeat to you today might be the beginning of a spiritual battle that, when fought with the right weapons, can lead to victory beyond your current imagination. Are you ready to learn how to fight this battle with the wisdom of a saint who never lost hope in any soul? Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more teachings and advice from Saint Teresa. When your child rejects God, your first instinct might be to argue, to present logical proofs, or to impose stricter religious rules. But Saint Teresa teaches us something that goes against our natural parental impulses. The most powerful action you can take happens in complete silence, away from your child's eyes, in the hidden sanctuary of prayer. This isn't the desperate, anxious begging that comes from panic. This is what she called la oración de intercesión, intercessory prayer that becomes a daily offering of your broken heart to God. Saint Teresa wrote in her Way of Perfection that prayer is the most powerful weapon for the soul and for those we love. She understood that when we pray for someone, we're not trying to change God's mind about them. We're opening channels of grace that allow divine love to reach them in ways our human efforts never could. She taught that consistent, faithful prayer creates what she called caminos invisibles, invisible pathways through which God's mercy can travel to touch even the most hardened hearts. Your tears, your midnight vigils, your whispered pleadings are not falling into emptiness. They're building bridges between heaven and your child's soul. The Catechism of the Catholic Church teaches that intercessory prayer is an act of confident faith in God's power. CCCC 2629, 2632. When you kneel each night and place your child's name before the Blessed Sacrament, when you whisper their needs during the Rosary, when you offer each day's small sufferings for their conversion, you're participating in the mystery of the communion of saints. You're joining your voice to that of countless parents throughout history who have stormed heaven's gates with their love. Saint Monica prayed for 17 years for her son Augustine's conversion. Saint Teresa reminds us that persistent prayer never goes unanswered, though God's timing often differs from our own. But there's something specific you must understand about this prayer. It cannot be born from anxiety or desperation alone. It must flow from trust. Saint Teresa insisted that prayer without abandonment to God's will becomes a form of spiritual violence. You must pray with your hands open, offering your child to God while trusting that divine love surpasses even your parental love. Can you find the courage to pray not just for your child's return, but for whatever outcome will truly serve their soul's deepest good? This surrender, painful as it might be, is what transforms your prayer from human pleading into divine cooperation. The second action Saint Teresa prescribes might sound strange to modern ears, but it carries the weight of 2,000 years of Christian wisdom, the deliberate offering of sacrifices and small mortifications for your child's conversion. This doesn't mean dramatic penances or self-punishment. It means transforming the unavoidable sufferings of daily life into spiritual currency that can be spent for another soul's benefit. According to the Catechism, voluntary penance has reparative value and can be offered for specific intentions. CCC 1434. Saint Teresa lived this practice with extraordinary discretion. She would offer small discomforts: a cup of coffee declined, a comfortable chair avoided, silence maintained when she wanted to complain, as tiny gifts to God for the souls she loved most. In one of her letters, she wrote, "I live these little mortifications in silence, offering them for the souls most in need of mercy." She understood that love naturally seeks to share in the beloved's suffering, and when we cannot directly help our children, we can at least offer our own small sacrifices as a form of spiritual solidarity. This practice isn't about earning God's favor through self-inflicted pain. It's about participating in the mystery of redemptive suffering that Christ demonstrated. When you choose to fast one day a week for your child's conversion, when you offer up a headache instead of immediately reaching for medicine, when you accept criticism without defending yourself, you're joining your small sufferings to Christ's infinite sacrifice. Saint Teresa taught that these hidden offerings, made with pure intention, have mysterious power to break spiritual chains that bind other souls. The beauty of this practice lies in its secrecy. Your child never needs to know that you've chosen to walk to work instead of driving, offering the discomfort for their return to faith. They don't need to know that you've given up your favorite dessert, or that you've chosen to sleep on a harder mattress, transforming these small sacrifices into prayers without words. Saint Teresa believed that hidden sacrifices are more powerful than visible ones because they're free from human pride and recognition. What small comfort could you offer up today as a silent gift for your child's soul? The third action strikes at the very heart of Catholic faith: participating in the Eucharist with intensified devotion and arranging for Masses to be celebrated specifically for your child's conversion. The Second Vatican Council teaches that the Mass is the source and summit of all Christian life. Lumen Gentium 11. When you attend Mass carrying your child's spiritual needs in your heart, you're bringing them mystically to the foot of the cross, where infinite mercy flows for every soul. Saint Teresa had profound reverence for the Mass, writing in her spiritual diary that, at each Mass, heaven descends to earth, and every soul present can draw from infinite grace. She understood that the Eucharistic sacrifice isn't just a commemoration of past events. It's a present reality where Christ's redemptive power becomes available to every generation. When you place your child's name in your heart during the consecration, when you receive communion with the specific intention of their conversion, you're invoking the same divine love that transformed water into wine and brought Lazarus back from death. Having Masses celebrated specifically for your child's conversion is one of the most powerful spiritual works of mercy available to Catholic parents. This practice, rooted in the Church's ancient tradition, recognizes that the Eucharistic sacrifice has infinite value and can be applied to specific intentions. Saint Teresa often requested Masses for people she was trying to help spiritually, believing that nothing could resist the power of Christ's sacrifice when offered for a particular soul. Each Mass said for your child becomes a direct appeal to divine mercy, a way of saying to God, "Look not on my merits, but on the infinite value of your Son's sacrifice." But attending Mass for your child's conversion requires something more than physical presence. It demands what Saint Teresa called participación del corazón, participation of the heart. You must enter each Mass carrying your child's image in your soul, offering your own reception of communion as a bridge between divine grace and their distant heart. During the Our Father, when you say, "Forgive us our trespasses," include your child's struggles with faith. During the Sign of Peace, extend Christ's peace toward their troubled spirit. Can you transform your Sunday Mass from routine obligation into weekly warfare for your child's soul? The fourth action requires perhaps the greatest courage because it demands you examine your own life with brutal honesty. The Catechism states that Christian witness is the first proclamation of the Gospel. CCC 2044. Saint Teresa understood that children who drift from God often do so because they've seen inconsistency between their parents' proclaimed faith and lived reality. She wrote bluntly to one mother, "Incoherence pushes away, but silent fidelity to the gospel attracts." This doesn't mean you must be perfect. Saint Teresa herself struggled with human weakness throughout her life. It means you must be authentic. If you want your child to believe that faith brings peace, they need to see that peace in your daily life. If you claim that God provides for all needs, they must witness your trust during financial difficulties. If you speak about forgiveness, they need to see you forgiving those who hurt you. Your life must become a living argument for the truth of everything you've tried to teach them about God. Saint Teresa was painfully aware of how family members watched her every action for signs of hypocrisy. In her letters to fellow religious, she often mentioned the special responsibility of those who claim to live for God. We are living books that others read to understand what faith truly means. Your child, even in their rejection of God, is still reading the book of your life. They're watching to see if faith makes you more loving, more patient, more joyful, or if it simply makes you more anxious and controlling. This means avoiding the temptation to constantly lecture, argue, or impose religious practices on your resistant child. Saint Teresa advised, "Let your life speak louder than your words. A soul that sees genuine peace and joy will naturally wonder about its source. Instead of bitter criticisms or forced religious impositions, let your child see that faith is a source of authentic happiness and freedom. When they inevitably face life's difficulties, they'll remember the strength they witnessed in you. Are you living in a way that makes faith attractive, or are you unwittingly confirming their reasons for walking away?" The fifth action challenges everything our parental hearts want to demand: absolute trust in God's providence while resisting the temptation to despair. The Church teaches that sin against hope includes despair. CCC 2091-2092, and Saint Teresa knew that anxious parents often fall into this spiritual trap. She wrote in one of her most famous poems, "Patience achieves everything. Who has God lacks nothing." But how do you practice patience when each day your child moves further from God? Saint Teresa lived through her own dark periods when God seemed absent, when prayers felt empty, and when her spiritual progress appeared to have stopped completely. She called these times sequidades, spiritual dryness, and she learned that they were not signs of divine abandonment, but opportunities for deeper trust. She wrote to a desperate mother, "God's silence is not God's absence. Sometimes He withdraws consolation to strengthen faith, just as a loving parent gradually removes support so the child can learn to walk alone. This patience isn't passive resignation, it's active trust combined with continued effort. You keep praying, keep sacrificing, keep attending Mass, keep living your faith authentically, but you release your grip on the timeline." Saint Teresa understood that conversion is ultimately a work of grace that respects human freedom. God will not force your child to believe, but divine love will persistently knock on their heart's door, using every prayer you've offered, every sacrifice you've made, every authentic moment of faith they've witnessed in your life. The most difficult part of this patience is watching your child make choices that break your heart while trusting that even their mistakes serve a purpose in God's plan. Saint Teresa wrote, "Sometimes souls must wander in darkness before they can truly appreciate light. What appears to be loss may be the beginning of the deepest finding." Your child's current rejection of faith might be their way of claiming ownership of their spiritual life, rather than simply inheriting yours. Can you trust that the same God who pursued you through your own spiritual struggles is also pursuing your child with infinite creativity and love? What might surprise you is how modern science has begun to confirm what Saint Teresa understood through mystical experience centuries ago. Neuroscience research at Harvard and the University of Wisconsin has demonstrated that intercessory prayer combined with states of inner silence dramatically reduces anxiety levels, improves emotional resilience, and strengthens the immune system. When you pray for your child with the focused intention Saint Teresa taught, you're not just engaging in religious practice, you're activating neural pathways associated with hope, peace, and emotional stability. Studies in neuroplasticity have confirmed that deliberately repeated spiritual affirmations during times of difficulty actually change brain patterns associated with fear, anxiety, and despair. Saint Teresa didn't use these terms, but she lived the results. In her letters, she describes how some mothers, after learning to trust rather than worry, recovered their peace even without seeing visible miracles in their children's lives. She understood that the first transformation had to happen in the parent's heart before it could extend to the child. Contemporary psychology has also validated what the saints always knew, that children, even adult children, remain deeply influenced by their parents' emotional and spiritual states. Research shows that parental anxiety about a child's choices often reinforces the child's rebellious behavior, while parental peace and confidence can create space for the child to reconsider their positions. Saint Teresa wrote, "A soul at peace creates an atmosphere where other souls can breathe freely, but an anxious soul makes everyone around it feel suffocated." This scientific validation doesn't diminish the supernatural aspect of what you're experiencing. It confirms that God works through natural processes as well as miraculous interventions. When you practice the spiritual disciplines Saint Teresa taught, you're not just trying religious techniques. You're aligning yourself with fundamental truths about how human hearts and minds function. Your peaceful trust doesn't guarantee immediate conversion, but it creates optimal conditions for grace to work. Have you noticed that your own anxiety about your child's faith might be part of what pushes them further away? What you're experiencing as a parent of a child who has turned from God is part of a larger spiritual reality that Saint Teresa spent her life understanding and teaching. She knew that every soul exists in the midst of an invisible war between light and darkness, between grace and temptation, between divine love and spiritual emptiness. Your child's rejection of faith isn't just a psychological phase or intellectual disagreement. It's a manifestation of this deeper spiritual conflict that requires spiritual weapons to address. Saint Teresa wrote extensively about what she called la battaglia silenciosa, the silent battle that takes place in every human heart. She understood that the enemy of souls doesn't usually attack with obvious temptations. Instead, he whispers reasonable-sounding thoughts that gradually erode faith. Religion is for weak people. There's no evidence for God. You can be good without believing. Your parents just want to control you. These thoughts feel like the person's own ideas, making them particularly powerful and difficult to resist. In her work, Interior Castle, Saint Teresa describes how souls can be deceived by thoughts that appear logical but lead away from truth. She taught that parents must recognize they're not just dealing with their child's rebellion, they're participating in a cosmic battle for their child's eternal destiny. This understanding changes everything about how you approach the situation. Instead of feeling helpless or angry, you begin to see yourself as a warrior equipped with supernatural weapons: prayer, sacrifice, the Mass, authentic witness, and trusting patience. This invisible battle explains why traditional parenting approaches often fail when dealing with spiritual rejection. You cannot argue someone back to faith using purely rational methods because you're not dealing with a purely rational problem. You're dealing with a spiritual condition that requires spiritual remedies. Saint Teresa insisted that parents who understand this spiritual dimension become far more effective in helping their children because they address the real source of the problem. Are you ready to see your child's spiritual struggle as part of a larger battle where you have access to divine reinforcements? Saint Teresa's teachings weren't just theoretical. They produced real results in the lives of countless families throughout the centuries. In the archives of Carmelite monasteries, letters exist from mothers who followed her guidance and witnessed their children's return to faith. One mother wrote, "I stopped arguing with my son about God and began arguing with God about my son. Within 2 years, he returned to the sacraments." Another testified, "I offered every small suffering for my daughter's conversion." She later told me she began to feel drawn back to prayer during the exact months I was making these sacrifices. But Saint Teresa was always honest about the fact that not every story ends with dramatic conversion within the parent's lifetime. She knew mothers who practiced these spiritual disciplines faithfully for decades without seeing their children return to faith before their own deaths. Yet even these mothers testified to finding a peace that surpassed understanding, a ability to love their children without anxiety, and a confidence that their prayers were still working in ways they couldn't see. The Church's teaching on the communion of saints suggests that prayers and sacrifices continue to bear fruit even after death. Saint Teresa believed firmly that no authentic prayer is ever wasted. No genuine sacrifice ever fails to produce spiritual results. She wrote, "Souls who learn to trust in darkness build treasures in eternity that benefit generations they will never meet on earth." Your faithful practice of these 5 actions creates spiritual momentum that may influence not only your child but your grandchildren and their children. What matters most is not whether you see immediate results, but whether you remain faithful to what God is asking of you as a parent. Saint Teresa taught that spiritual maturity involves learning to act out of love rather than out of desperation for specific outcomes. When you pray, sacrifice, attend Mass, witness authentically, and trust patiently, regardless of your child's response, you're growing in holiness and creating invisible spiritual forces that will ultimately serve love's purposes. Can you find peace in knowing that your faithful love, even when not returned, has eternal value? There comes a moment in every parent's spiritual journey that Saint Teresa called el abandono total, total abandonment. This is the point where you must choose between your will for your child and God's will for your child, even when they seem to contradict each other. It's the most difficult spiritual test a parent can face, and it's often the moment when the greatest spiritual breakthroughs become possible. This abandonment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you love your child enough to entrust them completely to the one who loves them even more than you do. Saint Teresa reached this point multiple times in her own spiritual relationships. She had to release control over the spiritual progress of people she mentored, trusting that God's plan for them might be different from what she envisioned. She wrote, "The soul that learns to love without possessing discovers the freedom to love without limits." When you reach this point with your child, something profound shifts in the spiritual atmosphere around both of you. Your love becomes pure gift rather than anxious expectation. This ultimate surrender often paradoxically creates the space your child needs to choose faith freely rather than reactively. Many adult children who return to faith later testify that their parents' peaceful release of spiritual control was what finally allowed them to consider God without feeling manipulated or pressured. Saint Teresa understood that authentic faith cannot be inherited or imposed. It must be chosen. Your willingness to love your child regardless of their spiritual choices demonstrates the unconditional love of God in a way that no argument ever could. But this surrender requires a kind of death, the death of your dreams for your child's spiritual life, the death of your need to see their conversion for your own peace of mind, the death of your desire to control their eternal destiny. Saint Teresa called this the most perfect prayer, to want only what God wants, even when it breaks your heart. Yet she also promised that souls who reach this level of abandonment experience a peace that transcends all understanding and a love that no earthly loss can diminish. Are you ready to love your child with the freedom of eternity rather than the anxiety of time? Call to action. If this message has touched your heart, write in the comments, "Saint Teresa, teach me to love my child with divine trust." Subscribe to our channel and share this video with other parents who need this hope. Your witness could be the light another